The biggest mistake they made wasn't firing me. It was assuming I'd go quietly. My name is Russell Kowalczyk. I'm 56 years old, and for 34 of those years, I was the lead lineman for Pacific Gas and Electric's 500 kilovolt transmission corridor, the spine of Northern California. I knew every tower, every insulator, every single splice made on that line since the day it was energized. 2 days before the humiliation, I was 200 feet in the air, hanging from a harness, replacing a string of ceramic insulators shattered by a rifle shot. It was 104 degrees on the ground, probably 115 up on the steel. The sun beat down on my hard hat. My hands, wrapped in thick leather gloves, moved with an economy born of 3 decades of practice. Below me, my crew watched. They were good kids, but they learned this job from simulators and manuals. They didn't have the feel for it. Not yet. I finished the replacement, torqued the last bolt to spec by feel, and gave the signal. The power was restored without a flicker. It was just another Tuesday. The meeting was on a Thursday. I was told it was a strategic realignment debrief. I knew what that meant. I'd seen enough of these over the years. I walked into the regional headquarters, the air conditioning a shock after the valley heat. I nodded at the secretary, a woman who had worked here nearly as long as I had. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the first sign. The office belonged to the new vice president of regional operations, Bryce Ellison. He was 26 years old, with a fresh MBA from Yale and a pair of white Balenciaga sneakers that probably cost more than my first truck. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he smelled faintly of some expensive cologne that was trying too hard. An Armani suit, charcoal gray, hung on him perfectly. He had hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. His diploma was already framed on the wall, the ink still practically wet. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He didn't even look up from his laptop for a full 10 seconds. He was typing with 2 fingers, pecking at the keys like a bird. When he finally graced me with his attention, his eyes were flat and disinterested. "Russell," he said, mispronouncing my last name. "Have a seat." I remained standing. He gestured vaguely at the chair opposite his glass desk. "We're implementing a new operational paradigm, a full digital transformation to optimize our legacy assets." Optimization. I'd spent 34 years building and maintaining this section of the grid, and now this kid was optimizing me. He picked up a single sheet of paper from a neat stack. It was a script. He read from it in a monotone. "As part of this realignment, your position has been identified as redundant. Your deep experience, while valuable in the past, does not align with our forward-looking ESG framework." ESG misalignment. That was a new one. Environmental, social, and governance. It was the kind of phrase a committee invents to sound important while saying nothing at all. He was firing me because I was old and my knowledge wasn't stored on a cloud server. "Your contributions are noted," he continued, his eyes still on the paper. "But we need a team that is agile and data-driven. Your final paycheck and severance details are in this envelope." He slid a manila envelope across the desk. It stopped a few inches from the edge. He still hadn't made real eye contact. He was dismissing a man's entire career without the simple decency of looking him in the face. A dead calm settled over me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound and sudden clarity, the kind you get just before a catastrophic equipment failure, when you see exactly how the chain of events is going to unfold. I reached out and took the envelope. I didn't open it. I looked at Bryce Ellison, at his wrinkle-free suit, and his soft, manicured hands. He thought this was the end of the conversation. He thought authority came from his title and his Ivy League degree. Here's what Bryce Ellison didn't know. He didn't know about the splices. Specifically, the batch of compression splices installed after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. He didn't know they were made from a slightly different aluminum alloy that had a higher coefficient of thermal expansion than the modern ones. And he certainly didn't know that I was the sole holder of a very specific, very obscure certification. I placed my hard hat on his desk. It was an old fiberglass model, yellowed with age, covered in stickers from decades of safety seminars and union meetings. It was dented and scratched. It had saved my life more than once. It looked completely out of place on the polished glass of his expensive desk. A relic from another time. "I understand," I said. My voice was even. He finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He expected me to argue, to plead, to get angry. He had a script for that, too, I was sure. "Good," he said, already turning back to his laptop. "The door is right there. Your access card will be deactivated by the time you reach the lobby." I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. The breaking point came in February 2020. That was when they brought Bryce in. His father was a major shareholder, sat on the board. We all knew what it was. A place for the kid to get some operational experience before failing upwards into a corner office in the San Francisco headquarters. He arrived with a team of consultants, all of them under 30, all of them talking about synergy and disruption. They walked the line yards with iPads, taking pictures of equipment they didn't understand and nodding sagely. I tried to talk to him once. A week after he started, I brought him the maintenance logs for the Path 15 corridor. Thick binders, filled with my handwriting, detailing 30 years of work. Notes on soil composition under the tower footings, patterns of insulator flashovers during the rainy season, the specific torque settings needed for the old-style clamps on Tower 74B. None of it was in the official PG&E system. It existed only in these books and in my head. "What's this?" he'd asked, wrinkling his nose at the dusty binders. "It's the service history," I told him. "The real history. There are things in here you need to know." He waved a dismissive hand. "We're digitizing all legacy data. Just have someone scan it." He turned back to his screen, which was displaying some kind of colorful chart. "We can't be relying on paper, Russ. It's not scalable." He called me Russ. I was Mr. Kowalczyk to the apprentices. Russ to men who had bled with me on a line. This kid hadn't earned the right. I knew then he was a problem. A dangerous one. He saw the grid as a theoretical model, a series of inputs and outputs on a screen. He didn't understand it was a living, breathing thing. A beast. And a beast always has a memory. That same evening, I went home and told my wife, Sarah. She saw the look on my face. We'd been married for 37 years. She could read me better than any schematic. "It's the new one, isn't it?" she asked. I just nodded. I was thinking about my son, Mark. He was in his third year of engineering school at Cal Poly. The tuition wasn't cheap. I'd been working overtime for years to make sure he wouldn't come out buried in debt like his friends. I was 56. I had planned on working another 5, maybe 6 years, build the nest egg a little more, see Mark graduate, maybe buy that small fishing boat I'd always talked about. "Don't let him get to you," Sarah said, putting a hand on my arm. "You're the best they have. They know it." But they didn't. The people who knew were mostly retired or gone. The new management, the Bryces of the world, they didn't know anything but the bottom line on a quarterly report. They saw my salary, my benefits, my pension liability. They saw a number, a legacy cost, an item to be optimized. The key to it all went back to 1995. Deregulation was tearing through the California energy market. The state, in its infinite wisdom, created the California Independent System Operator, CAL-ESO, to manage the grid. New rules, new regulations, new standards. It was chaos. Most of the grid had been built in the 60s and 70s, with major upgrades in the 80s. The new standards didn't always mesh with the old hardware. Our chief engineer at the time was a man named Arthur Jensen. He was a brilliant, foul-mouthed engineer of the old school who saw the disaster coming. He knew that the new wave of engineers wouldn't understand the peculiarities of the old system. He called me into his office one afternoon. It was cluttered with rolled-up blueprints and half-empty coffee cups. He pushed a thick document across his desk. "Read this," he said. "It's a new Cal ISO provision. Section 12B, Article 4. I read it. It was dense, full of legalese and technical jargon. But the gist was this. For any transmission line components installed before 1995, any hot work or major repair required a technician with a specific certification acknowledging their expertise with the outdated equipment. It was a grandfather clause, designed to prevent new crews from accidentally taking down the grid while working on unfamiliar hardware. Without that certification, the only way to legally work on those components was a full grid isolation, a de-energization. They're calling it the Legacy Splice Authorization, Arthur said, lighting a cigarette right there in his office. You could still do that back then. Most of the other utilities are just going to replace all the old hardware. Cost them a fortune. PG&E is too cheap for that. They're going to sweat the assets. He blew a cloud of smoke toward the ceiling. There are only a handful of guys who actually qualify for this thing. You're one of them. I'm putting your name in. A month later, a certificate arrived in the mail. It was an unimpressive piece of paper from Sacramento. I signed it, made a copy for the company files, and put the original in my safe deposit box at the bank. I didn't think much of it again for 25 years. But what they didn't understand was that paperwork is the ultimate authority. Bryce, with his MBA and his apps, thought power was in his title. He was wrong. Real power, the kind that lasts, is written down, notarized, and filed away in a government office. After I was fired, I drove home in my 1978 Ford Bronco. I rebuilt that truck from the frame up with Mark when he was a teenager. Every nut and bolt. It had a 351 MV8 engine that I could tune by ear and a working CB radio just for the hell of it. It smelled of gasoline and old vinyl. It was honest. It wasn't trying to be anything it wasn't. I didn't tell Sarah right away. I went to the bank first. I took the original certificate out of the safe deposit box. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. I went to a copy shop and had 5 high-quality color copies made. I put the original back in the bank and drove home. I spent the next 2 weeks in my garage. I organized my tools. I changed the oil in the Bronco. I re-spooled the line on my fishing reels. I was waiting. My old crew called. A few of them. They were angry, confused. I told them it was the company's decision, and I wished them the best. I didn't offer advice. I didn't answer technical questions. My knowledge was no longer theirs to have. It was mine. The first heat wave of the summer hit in late June. It was a monster. The news called it a heat dome. Temperatures in the Central Valley climbed to 110, then 112, then 115. I watched the afternoon news and saw the strain on the grid. Rolling brownouts in Sacramento. Flex alerts in the Bay Area. They were asking people not to use their air conditioners. In a heat wave. I knew what was happening. The 500 kilovolt lines were heating up under the sun and the massive electrical load. As they heated, they expanded. As they expanded, they sagged. The 1989 splices, with their unique aluminum alloy, were expanding at a faster rate than the conductor cable itself. It was putting immense mechanical stress on the connection points. They were the weak link. I knew for sure, 3 weeks after I was fired. I was up at Lake Shasta, fishing for bass. My phone, which I usually kept off, buzzed in my pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, another call, this time from Frank Miller, my old foreman. A good man. I answered. "Russ, thank God," he sounded stressed. "We've got a problem. A big one." "I don't work for the company anymore, Frank," I said calmly. I know. but nobody else knows what to do. We've got hotspots on the Path 15 line. The infrared drones are showing 3 splices near Tower 112 that are glowing. They're about to fail. Bryce is down here with his team, and they're talking about rerouting power through the Tehachapi inner T. It's a mess. Those are the 89 splices, aren't they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. There was a pause. Yeah, how'd you know? I put them in, I said. Good luck with that, Frank. I hung up. I cast my line back into the water. The sun was warm on my face. For the first time in 34 years, it wasn't my problem. The system began to collapse. Not all at once, but in a series of cascading failures, just as I knew it would. Bryce's data-driven solutions were useless. He couldn't tweak the splices into cooling down. He couldn't optimize physics. The company's lawyers, I learned later, had finally done their job. They dug through the old regulatory filings and found Section 12B. They found the legacy splice authorization requirement. Then they cross-referenced it with the personnel files. And they found only one name: Russell Kowalczyk. Terminated. Effective 3 weeks prior. What he hadn't realized was that by firing me, he hadn't just gotten rid of an old lineman. He had legally prohibited his own company from performing emergency repairs on its own critical infrastructure. The call came 2 days later. It wasn't Frank. It was a senior vice president from the San Francisco office, a man named Henderson. I'd met him a few times over the years. He was a serious person. Russ? It's Bill Henderson. His voice was tight with anxiety. We have a situation here, a critical one. I hear that, I said, watching a hawk circle over the lake. We need you to come back, he said. Name your price. We'll make it right. I'm not interested in coming back as an employee, I said. My relationship with PG&E is over. As a consultant, then, he said, the desperation clear in his voice. We need your authorization. The board has approved a significant compensation package. I'm listening, I said. I agreed to meet them the next morning. Not at the office. At Murphy's Diner, a neutral place halfway between my house and the regional headquarters. I got there first. I took a booth in the back and ordered a black coffee. I saw them pull up in a black Lincoln Navigator. Henderson got out, then Bryce Ellison. Bryce looked terrible. His perfect hair was a mess. His expensive suit was rumpled. He hadn't shaved. The swagger was gone. He looked like what he was, a child who had broken his father's favorite watch and was about to face the consequences. They slid into the booth opposite me. Henderson looked grim. Bryce wouldn't look at me. He stared into his lap. Russ, Henderson began, thank you for meeting us. I'll be direct. We have a crisis. The grid is on the verge of a catastrophic failure. We need to replace 3 splices on the 500 kilovolt line, and as you know, your certification is required to do the work without taking the whole northern grid offline. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was hot and bitter. Yes, I know. We are prepared to offer you a 1-year consulting contract. A very generous one, Henderson said. He slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. I looked past him, at Bryce. I spoke to Henderson, but my words were for the kid. My termination papers cited ESG misalignment. It said my skills were redundant and part of a legacy system. I let the words hang in the air. It seems that legacy is more valuable than you thought. Bryce flinched. Henderson cleared his throat. Mistakes were made, Russ. Mr. Ellison was overzealous. He didn't have a full understanding of the operational realities. That was the corporate way of saying the kid screwed up, and now the adults had to clean up the mess. I leaned forward. The time for waiting was over. I'll come back, I said, but not for a consulting contract. I will solve this one problem for you. Here are my terms. There is no negotiation. I laid it out for them. My voice was quiet, but the words hit like hammer blows in the quiet diner. First, a fee of $3 million. Not a contract. A one-time fee, wired to my account before I set foot on company property. That's for my expertise and for the use of my certification. Henderson's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. Second, a public apology from the PG&E Board of Directors, published in the San Francisco Chronicle and the Wall Street Journal. It will state that my termination was a grievous error and that my 34 years of loyal service were wrongfully dismissed. I paused, letting that sink in. And third, I said, finally looking directly at Bryce Ellison. He shrank back in the vinyl booth. I want his termination letter, not a resignation. A termination. For cause. I want it hand-delivered to my house by a courier by noon tomorrow, along with confirmation that he will be escorted from the building by security. Silence. The only sound was the clatter of plates from the kitchen. Henderson stared at me. Bryce looked like he was going to be sick. He had assumed his authority was absolute. He was learning that control is something else entirely. It's found in the fine print. That's highly unorthodox, Henderson stammered. The grid is sagging, I said. The temperature is supposed to hit 116 tomorrow. You don't have time for orthodox. I stood up, put $5 on the table for the coffee, and walked out of the diner. The ball was in their court. 6 months later, I was standing on the deck of my new boat. It was a 24-foot Boston whaler, moored in the Sacramento River Delta. The sun was setting, turning the water to gold. Sarah was with me. She was smiling. They had agreed to every term. The $3 million, which my financial advisor had already put to work, arrived in my account at 10:47 the next morning. At 11:30, a courier in a crisp uniform handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was Bryce Ellison's termination letter, signed by Henderson. It cited gross operational negligence. The public apology ran 2 days later. It was everything I had demanded. My phone rang for a week straight. Old colleagues, friends, even a couple of reporters. I didn't answer most of the calls. I did go back, just for one day. I drove my Bronco to the staging area near the transmission corridor. Frank and the old crew were there. They looked at me with a new kind of respect. There were no handshakes, just a series of quiet nods. They understood. I put on my old hard hat. I didn't go up the tower myself. I was a consultant now. I directed the work from the ground, talking the crew through the delicate process of installing the bypass jumpers, removing the failing 1989 splices, and replacing them with the new, more stable hardware. It was over in 6 hours. The grid was secure. I saw Henderson there, watching from his air-conditioned SUV. He got out when we were done. He tried to shake my hand. "Russ, I can't thank you enough," he said. I just looked at his outstretched hand and then back at him. "You paid the bill," I said. "That's thanks enough." I got back in my Bronco and drove away. I never set foot on PG&E property again. Mark graduated from Cal Poly with honors and no debt. He took a job with an engineering firm in Colorado. He designs wind turbines. He's building things for the future. I'm proud of him. He calls every Sunday. We talk about engines and pressure gradients. Our relationship, strained by years of my long hours and missed weekends, felt solid again. It was a foundation I could build on. I learned that Bryce Ellison never worked in the industry again. The story of his incompetence was too public, too spectacular. His father's connections couldn't save him from that. He became a cautionary tale told in boardrooms, a ghost story for arrogant young executives. Sometimes I think about him. I think about his perfect suit and his Yale degree. He had all the symbols of power, but none of the substance. He confused a map with the territory. He looked at a spreadsheet and thought he understood a 3-ton steel tower swaying in a high wind. Loyalty, I learned, is a contract. It's a two-way street. For 34 years, I held up my end of the bargain. I sacrificed family dinners, holidays, my own health, all for the company. When they broke that contract, they didn't just fire an employee. They severed their own lifeline. They just didn't know it until the lights started to flicker. Some assets don't show up on a quarterly report. Experience, instinct, institutional memory, the knowledge of which bolt needs an extra quarter turn and which splice will fail in a heat wave. That was the first thing they missed, and the last thing they would ever forget. The real power isn't in the corner office. It's in the hands of the people who know how to keep the lights on. And I was the man who knew all the switches.